What's the creepiest thing you saw as a kid? Story 1. There was a gravel pit at the end of my road where people used to go and raise hell, do Ds, etc. It was also a great place to ride bikes, which is why I went there a lot. One time a purple Volkswagen Bug came tearing through the front of the pit where I had stopped with some other guys. We could hear the driver revving the engine and running the Volkswagen over the trails that ran through the woods behind the pit. We had a bad feeling about it and got out of there. Next day, we found the Volkswagen overturned, smashed up, and partially burned. I told my parents about it, but I don't think they believed me. It stayed there for weeks afterwards. We threw rocks at it. Another time, there was a car parked right in the middle of one of the pit trails I was riding on. I had to pass the car really close and got off my bike to push it. As I got to the driver's side door, a man was sitting there, with his head resting back. He roused and looked at me. I wasn't freaked out at all. He seemed really calm and harmless. I said hi, and he said hi back. Then he asked, "Do you brush your teeth?" And I said yes. He smiled, showing he was missing all of his front teeth, up and down, and said good. I don't. Looking back, it was clear the guy was parked there getting high. It was really sad, and I felt bad for the guy even as a little kid. I don't know why my parents let 6 to 10-year-old kids over there. Story 2. I was in early high school, maybe late middle school. My cousin used to walk to our house a lot to play video games and just hang out. He's like 6 to 7 years older than I am. He messages me on Facebook asking if I'm home, and I tell him yeah, and to just come over whenever. I was playing my Xbox, Dead Rising 2 I think, in my older brother's bedroom. The bedroom window faces the sidewalk along a road that connects to another road leading out of town. Small town. It's dark outside and the bedroom window blinds are open. My cousin usually comes to my window first to let me know he's there because my mom is usually in bed by then. That way I can let him in without making too much noise. I'm playing my Xbox and in the corner of my eye I see a shadowed figure in the window frame. Cool, I assume it's my cousin. I get up, motion for the front door, and make my way out to the front door. I look through the peephole and no one is there. I walk back into the bedroom and the figure is still there, not moving. I think in my head he's just around. I walk back to the window and I now open it, privacy screen between us, and tell him to just come to the front door already. I'm standing there waiting for him to move or respond. Something. The figure walks closer to the window and from what I can tell, reaches for the privacy screen. I freak out. I slam the window shut and fall back onto the bed. I run out of the bedroom and scream for my mom. She comes running out and we call the cops immediately. They show up a couple minutes later and they don't find anyone around. Meanwhile, I'm texting my cousin asking if he was at my house. He responds back that he hasn't even left his house yet. To this day, he says it wasn't him. Every time I tell this story, I get all teary-eyed because I was genuinely freaked out. Last time I ever had the blinds up at night. Story 3. I was at a Portillo's once when I was 12, and I was waiting with my little brother at a booth while my parents got our food. This guy was standing with his tray, kind of watching me. Then after a couple minutes, he started to walk over really fast, not breaking eye contact with me. He was 2 feet from the table, and my dad came out of nowhere and scared him. He looked so surprised and just said he wanted to see if I'd get scared or not. He left his tray full of food near the door and left. My folks reported him, but we never went to that location again since we found a better one closer to home. Story 4. I was an 8-year-old boy. Went to a classmate's house after school for the first time. The only adult there was his grandma, who had about 50 cats running around. She asked with some authority if we were going to take a shower. My friend seemed annoyed by her question, but said we needed to go to the outdoor shower. I went along with him, somewhat confused. I had never had a shower anywhere but home, and never with another kid. We went to this cabin-like structure in his yard and got undressed. After a few minutes of showering, I looked through the window and my heart got a jolt. Behind the glass, the old lady's face was staring right at me. Story 5. We used to go boating a lot when I was a kid. I was about 10, and I remember a group of people just down the shore from us had some sweet Wave Blaster 2s. Wave Blaster people were riding very recklessly, getting too close and trying to spray each other, etc. It was only a matter of time before we heard the crash, just a loud thud and crunch. Some boaters next to us rushed out to the middle of the lake and came back to shore with a dead woman on the swim deck of their boat. I remember someone doing CPR on her for a really long time. Life flight showed up and landed on the beach soon after. Then they shut down the engines and then the sheriff showed up. We took my uncle's boat out and helped recover the crashed wave blaster from the middle of the lake. It was half sunken and had a humongous hole in the side of it. The collision must have been incredibly hard. Story 6. Wasn't really a kid, but when I was 16, I was helping out on my uncle's farm during the summer as a means to earn money for a car, which I planned on buying when I got home. I would use their ATV as a means of getting around, since it was mostly gravel roads and muddy paths around the fields and property. One morning, I took the ATV to my uncle's parents' place to get the combine and other machinery ready when I spotted a pickup truck, still running, parked on the shoulder next to one of the fields that we were in the process of harvesting. Thinking it was of my uncle's friends, I pulled up next to the truck and saw this fairly heavy-set middle-aged man slumped over in the driver's seat. I tapped on the window and got no response and stepped it up until I was banging on the door with my fists. Even though I had a cell phone on me, coverage was non-existent where I was, so I sped down the road to my uncle's parents' place and called 911. 15 minutes later, a patrol car pulls up, and the officer breaks open the window to let himself in. That's when the smell of feces and pee hit everyone present, and it was enough to make me vomit. An ambulance shows up 5 minutes later, but it's too late. The guy is DOA. The officer took down my statement and wished me a good day. A couple of months later, I got a phone call from my cousin, and it turned out the guy I found was a major D addict from a couple of counties over. From what the police gathered, he had been driving strung out for a few hours before stopping right in front of my uncle's field to shoot up for what would be his last time. Don't do D's, kids. Story 7. Me and my best friend would explore the drainage tunnels under the Vegas area where we grew up. These were miles long, and it was always really cool down there, so it was a good way to escape the heat of our scorching hot summers. We went into this one that goes under the Fiesta Casino and found a camp with a bunch of homeless crackheads. Mind you, we are like 11 years old, and we just kept going like it was nothing. It wasn't scary then, but when I look back at it, we could have been in some serious danger. Our parents had no idea we did this or where we were, and we had no cell phones. We could have been kidnapped and never have been found. Story 8. This doesn't hold a candle to the other stories, but creepy for a 4-ish-something-year-old. Staying with my grandma and grandpa in their multi-story Victorian home/mansion while my sister was being born. I am 4 years older than her. That's why I know I was 4. Anyway, old creepy house to begin with a spiral staircase. I was sleeping in a room at the top of the stairs, pitch black, all lights in the house off, when I heard a noise at the foot of the stairs. I turned my head and saw a faint glowing green ring floating slowly up the staircase. It continues to float up the stairs, slowly, methodically, and heads straight to my room. It stops at the doorway and hovers there for a good while. I am terrified because I felt a presence, but didn't want to scream or say anything. I just closed my eyes and hoped it went away. Eventually, I opened my eyes and it was gone, but I was still scared. When I finally got home a few days later, I told my mom what happened, and she started laughing, which kind of pissed me off. She explained to me that her dad had a tobacco pipe with a glow-in-the-dark ring. I found out later that he came back late from the bar and didn't want to wake me up, so he took off his shoes and walked up the stairs, slowly, while holding onto the banister, methodically, because he was tipsy. He stopped by the room to check on me, waiting there, hovering, while his eyes adjusted. Story 9. One day when I got out of kindergarten half-day morning classes, my mother didn't show up to pick me up. While I was waiting by the curb, a man parked across the street yelled at me, "Hey, what are you doing?" I yelled back I was waiting for my mom, and he yelled back that my father had sent him to pick me up, and my dad had told me about strangers before, so I asked, "Really? What's my dad's name?" His face went from a big smile to a cold look, and he said, "You're a smart one, aren't you?" I hauled back into the school and ran into the office where there were some women working there and told them what happened. That was in the mid-60s. When that man's face changed, it was the creepiest thing I've ever seen in my life, like looking death right in the face. Story 10. I was about 6 years old. I was afraid of the dark. I had an older sister, but she wouldn't let me sleep with her anymore when I got scared, so I laid awake a lot at night. I had a window in my room, and I remember a street light came on. I thought that was weird because it was very late, and I lived in a quiet neighborhood. This was late 70s. I got up to look out the window, and I saw the craziest thing. I will never forget it. It was a small man dressed in a jester costume. I remember the shoes with the pointy bells, and he was sneaking behind our car. It was surreal. Story 11. My family was vacationing in Florida when I was about 5 or 6 years old. At one point, we went to a grocery store to grab some supplies, and I asked my mom if I could go to the cereal aisle, the next one over from where we were, And she said yes. So I went over and almost immediately some bald guy with a leather jacket started walking over to me and said, "Your mom just asked me to take you outside while she buys you a present. She doesn't want you to see." Now, even though I was young, the situation didn't seem right because I had just talked to my mom about 20 seconds earlier and had been with her the entire time we were there, so I immediately panicked and ran back to my mom. I didn't say anything at first because I also felt like I might have been upsetting her by not doing what she may or may not have just said to this guy. So I just waited to see if she would say anything. Of course, she said nothing, and we just kept shopping as usual. As we were checking out like 10 minutes later, I saw that same guy walking out of the store with a little boy around my age. It wasn't until years later that I told my parents this story and they were mortified. But not a day goes by that I don't wonder if I witnessed someone being kidnapped and did nothing to stop it. Story 12. One of our first Halloweens in our new town, when I was 8, we had 2 people covered head to toe in purple and black cloth who barged in and sat down on our couch. My dad was at work at his new job and me, my sister and my mom were home alone. We couldn't see who they were. They handed us a card asking us to guess who they were, and if we got it right in 3 tries they'd unmask. We didn't get it right. They got out and they walked out. My mom was freaked enough that she called Dad, said what happened and asked him to come home. To this day we don't know who they were. I have my suspicions. I've since found it's a thing called Belsnickel. Story 13. My family, me and my 2 older brothers, my parents and a cousin, were heading to St. Louis to see the Arch and go to Six Flags. I was 9 at the time. I was sitting in the very back of our minivan, playing my Game Boy, when I heard my mom gasp. I looked out the window to see traffic on the eastbound lanes of the highway at a complete standstill. There was a brown Jeep Wrangler that had collided with a minivan just like ours. Both vehicles were smoking and were a tangled mess of metal. The occupants of the Jeep were laying in the highway and mangled. The man and the woman looked like rag dolls that had their limbs torn behind their backs and their heads twisted around. The occupants of the van were still inside it and not moving. Kids just like me from what I saw. Blood running down the side of the vehicle. The only first responder on scene was a cop frantically running to place sheets on the bodies of the couple in the highway before more onlookers could see them. Story 14. Walking home from a community movie night in the park, a drunk guy with a duffel bag in hand was walking behind us as we walked back to the car. I was maybe 10 and we were stopped at a crosswalk when he caught up and asked if I was interested in baseball cards, saying that the bag was full of them. My mother gently told him no thank you. He was just like, okay, just in case, and set it down and cut through a parking lot towards the train tracks. Mother called the cops, and shortly after, we heard the train horn go off more times than normal. Police came and asked some questions and checked the bag. Sure enough, aside from some empty beer cans, it was in fact full of baseball cards. Weirdest experience as a kid, and we never did find out what happened to the guy. Story 15. When I was 13, me, my twin, and 2 friends were laying on our skateboards in the middle of the night on an Air Force base in the Philippines. This was in 1987. There was a large full moon, and as my watch hit midnight and beeped, a large bat that had to be the size of a human flew under the moon. We all got up and started running for our house. As we were passing street lights, they would turn off, which made it worse. In the Philippines, there's a folklore about a half bat, half human called an aswang. If that wasn't an aswang, I don't know what was. Story 16. I was an altar boy in the 60s. I was making sure the candles were still lit in the church. I was also making sure that all the pews were clean and up to standard. I could hear mumbling coming from the side chapel where nuns and women said the rosary. I thought someone was injured as it was deep growling. I opened the door a bit to peek in and saw a nun hunched down rocking back and forth. She was speaking in what appeared to be tongues. She turned around and all I could see was the whites of her eyes. Well, I ran like the clappers out the church and on up the road home. My mother yelled at me for leaving my duty, but I was frightened of my shite. Never trusted being on my own in church again. Got demoted to just ringing the bell during Mass, thankfully so. Story 17. Not really creepy per se, just horrifying. When I was 12, me 2 sisters, mom, stepdad, grandpa, went to a Christmas party at my grandma's house. Grandma and grandpa are separated. After a few hours, my mom is clearly intoxicated. We drive home and she gets into an argument with my eldest sister, 17 at the time, about grades and D's, to the point where she starts crying and my grandpa comforts her. My mom then goes on to say she's going to finish herself and throw herself in front of a semi. All the while I was holding my 8-year-old sister and crying silently while listening to music. We stopped 15 minutes away from home to pick up our dogs from the doggy daycare. When we get there, my mom unbuckles and tries to get out. I have to hold her down from opening the door to jump into the road. We get home and an argument between my stepdad and mom ensues. I've been crying for 2.5 hours at this point and just want to sleep. This was the only time I've seen my stepdad cry. I won't back my mother for another 3 hours on end from going out of our front door into the state route and ending her life. The way I find my peace with this is music. I love my music. Story 18. I was 7 and survived the 2004 tsunami in Thailand. Witnessed the wave rise way above the already massive palm trees, approximately 40 feet, and my family and I watched / heard the wave crash into the ground from a rooftop, finishing so many people instantly. I saw a lot of bodies on the way. Story 19. I was walking to school, and I was about 5 or 6 years old, and some guy pulled up beside me in his car and asked if I would get in. He also offered me sweets to do so. I said no. The creepy bit was when he calmly said "clever boy" to me, then drove off. I never even told my parents or anyone else about this, as it would most likely freak them out. Story 20. Dad's side of the family pranked me by burying a fake body on our back property and had me dig it up to find valuables. Was only allowed to use a lantern for light. They stuffed old clothes with chicken bones. Sheetrock mud where the head was. Random fake jewelry as the treasures. I was like maybe 10 or 11. I remember digging up the boot first and started gagging because it became real at that point. That's a wrap for this video. Make sure to leave your relatable story down in the comments. I would love to make a video on them. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you next time.